Good afternoon and welcome to the Value Economics Show. Happy Monday. Hatred is a very interesting thing to observe. It's not a natural emotion or stance. It has to be built and fostered over time. Human beings are fallen and tribal by nature. We're protective over things that we believe in and that we love. But that's not the same thing as hate. Hate's a deeper emotion, one that has to be carefully cultivated to burn brighter and hotter than others. It's my contention that the reason why people hate things is because they hate something within themselves. Hatred is simply a projection of something you feel is insufficient or lacking within you. You don't want to confront that thing, whatever it is. You don't want to deal with it. It's too hard, it's too painful, or a mix of both. So therefore, you take aim at something outside of yourself, outside of your control, and do your best to degrade, destroy, and slander it. There have been no greater evidence of this trend than the phenomenon of Donald Trump and Trumpism. Donald Trump, ever since he took the now infamous ride down his golden escalator, has been hated by all of our most important and powerful institutions and the people that run them for a decade. No one has been more despised, loathed, and vilified than our 45th and 47th president and his supporters that are come along as an attached deal with him. There have been many claimed reasons as to why this posture has been taken towards Trump. He's a racist, they say. He's controlled by Putin, they screeched. He's a threat to democracy, they cried. All of these were used in an attempt to derail Trump's popularity, to remove him from the cultural lexicon. The collusion and coordination of these attacks were effective, nonstop, and vicious. But none of them are true. Trump actually doesn't hate anybody by the color of their skin, or by any other immutable characteristics for that matter. Trump isn't controlled by anybody, particularly a foreign government. Trump is only the second president in American history after Grover Cleveland to be elected in non-consecutive presidential terms twice, with the second one coming after the most definitive political mandate in half a century, notably after the second most slandered campaign in history after Abraham Lincoln, in which he was bankrupted, indicted hundreds of times, almost sent to prison, shot at twice, and hit once. When studying the escalation of hate-based attacks and crimes on Donald Trump, most presciently being the two attempts on his life in Florida and Butler, Pennsylvania, there are several trends that stick out. The most notable one, to me, is that all of the most vile attacks posed his way happened when he was on his way to victory the second time, when the writing was essentially on the wall that he would absolutely trounce Kamala Harris, who had just been implanted by the Democratic elites to replace Joe Biden, whose brain had turned to milkshake on national television just a month beforehand. This is a very curious thing to observe. If Trump were really that dangerous, why didn't they try to kill him in 2016? Why didn't they try to pull his real estate files and throw him into federal prison for inflating their values then? Why did they specifically target people like Steve Bannon, Peter Navarro, and Roger Stone, some of Trump's closest political allies, and throw them all in federal prison months before the campaign concluded then? They very well could have, but they didn't. And the answer to all of these questions is very clear. Donald Trump, for all of their criticism towards him, has learned from his first term. The danger of 2024 Trump versus 2016 Trump was that 2024 Trump had already been through the ringer. He already knew how the sausage was made. He knew exactly what buttons to press. The key to the political establishment's victories over Trump in his first term were nothing to do with their own intelligence or savvy, of which they possessed very little. They had everything to do with Trump's ignorance, which is now washed away. That terrified them, as it should have. But perhaps even more interestingly, they didn't hate the people around Donald Trump. Even though they despised everything that came out of Trump's mouth, our ruling class was largely pretty fine with the people he surrounded himself with and his closest advisors. Our establishment political class loved the rotation of characters that were in Trump's ear and orbit. People like John Bolton, Nikki Haley, Mark Milley, and Mike Pompeo. Even with someone like Mike Pence, who they claimed to hate based on his Christian faith and pro-life stances, they would very much rather have him than Donald Trump. He was far more reliable and predictable, far more likely to keep their gravy train moving apace. Even more so than the now non-ignorance of Donald Trump, our political elites feared this even more. Trump and Pence now hated each other, Pence's long-seated hatred for Trumpism having spilled over after January 6th. Bolton and entrenched D.C. swamp creatures like him took every opportunity to take potshots at him on cable news. Trump had stated that Haley and Pompeo would not be getting anywhere close to their former places in his new inner circle. Instead of the former D.C. insiders and corporate suits that defined his first term, Trump had ripped it down to the studs and replaced everything. Instead of his daughter Ivanka and son-of-law real estate tycoon Jared Kushner in his ear, his alpha brass-knuckle brawler sons Don Jr. and Eric took their place. Instead of listening to Rupert Murdoch for advice on who to pick as his VP, namely Doug Burgum and Marco Rubio, he listened to Tucker Carlson and picked J.D. Vance. He poached Susie Wiles from the implanted Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who ran his campaign masterfully and would soon become his chief of staff. All of these things horrified our ruling class. If enacted, things would be very different this time around. Incredibly different. And not in a good way for them at all. But the horror show had only just begun. After Trump's victory in November, he wasted no time on putting his further dream team into place. Having planned for victory for years, Trump and his transition team had all of their draft picks ready to go. All they had to do was turn in their cards. Team Trump smartly threw their opponents off guard by tossing out their most volatile selection first by announcing Matt Gaetz, the most wild MAGA firebrand and one of Trump's most loyal allies in Congress, as his nominee for Attorney General. After undergoing a weaponization of the prior DOJ not seen before in the history of our country, this was, arguably, Trump's most important pick. And the screeching began almost immediately. Gaetz was too wild even for most congressional Republicans, who began to work internally to disrupt the Gaetz confirmation. The state media panned the selection, branding it as just the latest breed of Trumpian incompetence. However, to their dismay, this is only the Trojan horse, a diversion from what was truly to come. Matt Gaetz never made it to the starting line, leaving Congress to host a show on OAN, and was replaced by Pam Bondi, the Attorney General of Florida who worked in the Trump-branded America First Policy Institute. But before Trump's opponents could declare a victory, he flooded the zone with all of his other picks, all of whom were just as, if not more, controversial. Namely, there were 5 of them: Pete Hegseth for the Department of Defense, Tulsi Gabbard for the intelligence community, Kash Patel for the Federal Bureau of Investigations, and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. for Health and Human Services. In addition, Elon Musk was appointed to oversee the new Department of Government Efficiency, which served as an outside auditor and data collection system for the entire federal government's budget. Once we're now discombobulated cries from our ruling class, we're now full-throated screams. What's interesting to note is that you never heard a thing about someone like Doug Burgum, for example, being named the Secretary of the Interior and fossil fuel czar. All of the people that were supposedly about quote-unquote climate change and quote-unquote green energy all fell silent when the 5 horsemen of the Trumpocalypse were appointed, as it did with all the other fraudulent social causes they claimed to care about. But they cared a lot about Hegseth, Gabbard, Patel, Kennedy, and Musk. They tried to torpedo each one of them, throwing the book at each individual candidate to get them to back off, shut up, and go away. The amount of hatred and vitriol that was spewed their way was almost uncanny. And so it's worth asking the question, why is this happening, and still happening? And in truth, there are very many more individualistic reasons. But there is one reason above all that these 5 share, and one that is far more telling. They refuse to lie. Let's take Pete Hegseth, for example. Earlier this year, Hegseth went on Fox News Sunday, the flagship Sunday show news program on his old network now hosted by Shannon Brehm. Brehm brought him on to talk through developments in the peace negotiations between Russia and Ukraine, something that Donald Trump had wanted to engage in ever since the war began. People, particularly conservatives, like to believe that Fox News backs Trump all the time, that they are biased towards his agenda with impunity. But this isn't true. Fox News largely views Donald Trump as an inconvenience. They're only willing to tolerate him as long as their package deal of the neocon and liberal agendas come with him, which are largely getting left behind by Trump. Therefore, even Fox News has knives out for the Trump cabinet and have shown on several occasions to use them. And this exact thing happened in this telling encounter with Shannon Brehm and Pete Hegseth. In the interview, Brehm asked her former colleague repeatedly to admit that the Russia invasion into Ukraine in February 2022 was quote-unquote unprovoked. Hegseth refused each time, citing a more nuanced point of view. Russia was absolutely wrong to invade Ukraine and to begin a bombardment of the country. No one really argues that. There are some estimates that place the death toll at nearly 2 million and the amount of displaced at nearly 10 between the two countries. But to say that the Russia invasion was quote-unquote unprovoked, that was a bridge too far for Hegseth, and he made a point in saying so. But yet Brehm pressed in, her producers undoubtedly in her ear prodding her to get Hegseth to budge. And to his credit, he didn't. He knew that even though Russia was wrong for rolling tanks across the Donbass, the West broke its post-Cold War promises time and time again to not expand NATO further to the east, and that the United States government led a coup of the Ukrainian government in 2014 that led to the elevation of Volodymyr Zelensky as the nation's leader. Wrong, absolutely. Unprovoked, the opposite, actually. In the words of Tupac Shakur, I ain't a killer, but don't push me. How about Tulsi Gabbard, whose confirmation hearing to become the Director of National Intelligence, i.e. the overseer of all our nation's spy agencies, was made into a living hell? Gabbard, who was once labeled a Russian asset by the most powerful establishment politician in the world, Hillary Clinton, and was put on a terror watch list by the intel heads, was their former public enemy number one. The government entities that had once colluded to destroy her life were now her employees. During her confirmation hearing, Gabbard was asked many questions and attacked ruthlessly by both sides of the aisle. As Chuck Schumer once honestly stated, the intel agencies have, quote, 7 ways to Sunday to screw you, and I would argue a lot more than that. There is no bigger example of that than Congress, who the intelligence community has dirt on more than likely all of them, and have used it since its inception to bully all of them to get what they want. Gabbard was a threat to that, so the intelligence community sicked their dogs on her to get her to back off. Gabbard's hearing came to a head when the subject of Edward Snowden arose. Snowden, who famously leaked government surveillance documents to the press in the most courageous act of whistleblowing in modern history, was despised by the intelligence community. They didn't like that he had gotten away, that he had made a fool out of them, that he had tarnished their reputations. If they could, to be frank, they'd most likely kill him as punishment, and they tried with Julian Assange several times. Gabbard was asked point blank and repeatedly by both Senate Democrats and Republicans whether Edward Snowden was a traitor. And treason, for those who don't know, is the only punishment in the United States Constitution that is namely punishable by death. It's the most serious accusation you can levy at someone, both legally and morally. Betraying your country is no small thing, and the lackeys of the Senate Intel Committee tried to bait Gabbard into it. But she didn't fall for it. While she admitted that Snowden broke the law, which was true, she did not admit that Snowden was a traitor, which was untrue. The Senate committee tried to catch her several times in an unrelenting assault. But Gabbard, like Hegseth, stood firm. She did not break. Frankly, she didn't even bend. But most importantly of all, she did not lie. The same was true with Kash Patel, who was appointed by Donald Trump to oversee the most corrupt and terroristic organization inside of the United States government, the FBI. The FBI, which has been so cruelly weaponized under previous administrations, was among the least trustworthy institution in our government. The prior director, Republican Chris Wray, and his boss, Democrat Merrick Garland, had shamed whistleblowers, arrested pro-life protesters, tortured January 6 prisoners in prison, and took license plates of school board moms. Patel himself, a longtime defense attorney and DOJ official, had said he would close the Hoover building and move the agents out into the field on day one, which he's promised to do, and has done. He promised to come in and rip the FBI to shreds, release the Diddy and Epstein files, and to get the FBI doing what it was initially set out to do: be federal cops and chase down bad guys. The entrenched governmental establishment who used the FBI as their version of the Stasi went white in the face when Kash Patel said this. Within 4 months of his tenure, Patel has made remarkable progress. Even though the disappointment of the Epstein files has left many with a lot to be desired, Patel has quietly thrown multiple members of the FBI's most wanted list into prison. Ask yourself this: when was the last time you had even heard of the FBI's most wanted list? In my adult life, the answer is never. In addition, he extradited the mastermind behind the Abbey bombing in Afghanistan, and just last week imprisoned over 200 child sex offenders. They're doing what they're supposed to do, and exactly what Kash Patel was commissioned by Donald Trump to do. Their jobs: imprisoning bad guys, and not American citizens. You don't hear anything about this from our political class. They're all too worried that they're next. And the hypocrisy of the American left was truly shown when Robert F. Kennedy Jr., hailing from the most iconic Democratic family of the 20th century, underwent confirmation to become the Secretary of Health and Human Services. Kennedy, who had spent years advocating for things like clean drinking water and the health of children, was raked over coals by all the people who supposedly idolized his father, as well as swamp creature Republicans who outsourced their disgust by citing things like his stance on abortion and free markets, two things that had nothing to do with making America healthy again. The crescendo of their hypocrisy was reached when RFK was confronted by Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, two Medicare for All advocates who supposedly cared about health care. Sanders, a now exposed plant for DC insiders and lobbyists, held up a screenshot from one of RFK's websites of onesies with vaccine jokes on them. Warren, attempting to strong-arm him, yelled belligerently about how he should never leave HHS and shill for a big food or pharma company. And RFK, like Hegseth, Gabbard, and Patel, refused to break. When asked by Sanders about whether he regretted selling the onesies, he said no. Not only did he have nothing to do with those organizations in his current position, he also stood by what he said. When Warren screeched at him about using his current position to become a lobbyist, he literally laughed in her face. As it turned out, in data published after the hearing, there were no two bigger recipients of pharma donor money than Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. Rounding out the five horsemen, there was no bigger earthquake that happened in the first part of the second Trump presidency than the announcement of Elon Musk running the Department of Government Efficiency. The meme-inspired Doge started off as such, a relatively unserious thing that no one thought would take off. How many times did either Democrats or Republicans talked about trimming government spending and going back to quote-unquote small government? The answer, a lot. Nothing had ever happened. No one, neither citizen nor politician, actually expected progress. But both parties turned out to be wrong. Musk came out swinging from the jump, targeting massive budgets of both federal agencies and NGOs on charges of taxpayer waste, fraud, and abuse. The United States government, for the longest time, has never opened its books. You can never question what actually went on under the hood of the government. That was only for our moral betters, for our self-anointed elites that felt that only they could truly know what was going on below the surface. Not only did Musk rip off the Band-Aid, he rubbed salt in the wound. The first organization he targeted was USAID, an NGO founded ironically by President Kennedy to, supposedly, distribute foreign aid to those in need. But this wasn't the 1960s anymore. Due to heroic reporting from people like Mike Benz, the real purpose of USAID was far more sinister. A tool of the CIA to overturn foreign governments, propagandize America's imperialistic pretenses around the world, and overall, to steal money. When Musk outed USAID's corruption, the outcry was so overwhelming that the Trump administration had no choice but to shut it down completely. In an absolutely wild scene, President Trump closed its doors, firing above 90% of the staff, and cut the spigot off completely. The Bureau of the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Agency, and ATF, and the Department of Education, incredibly, followed shortly after, two conservative victories once thought to be pipe dreams. The early work of Doge sent Democrats into a frenzy. Musk had gone for their sacred cows, their black box budgets, and used to promote their own interests and preserve their power. For the modern political elite, still in shambles after the Trump election, this was the only chance at long-term power preservation. They ranted and raved, shouted and screamed. But no one responded to their cries. They were simply shouting into the void. When someone tells you why they hate something, don't believe them. Instead, look deeper into their reasonings, their real motives for doing so. That, not surface-level justifications, will tell you all that you need to know. Our ruling class doesn't hate Pete Hegseth because he's some kind of a drunken misogynist, or Tulsi Gabbard because she's an implanted foreign spy, or Kash Patel because he's a partisan crusader, or Bobby Kennedy because he's a nut job, or Elon Musk because he's a technocratic oligarch. Instead, the hatred of these five, and many more, is far more simple than that. They're honest. They tell the truth. They are doing what they have been charged to do by their voters. Be a conservative cabinet with conservative values. That's what a democracy is, after all. Doing the will of the people that put their trust and votes into you. The people screaming incessantly about this are deeply dangerous, malevolent, pathetic, and unserious. We would do well to notice this and to treat them as such. Now let's get into our stories. I don't have, my voice might go. I don't have my mug here. So shout out to Archetype Boxing who provided that mug, but I don't have that mug. So we're going to just be getting into it. So, okay. So why is this pushback against the Trump cabinet really happening? I think that's the biggest thing that I want to talk about today, and really why this pushback, particularly on the conservative side, I'm going to be taking a lot of aim at the right-wingers today on this show. Why is this happening? Why is Trump really divisive? And I think the reason is because a lot of quote-unquote conservatives out there who say that they're on quote-unquote on the right or quote-unquote conservative is that they're liars. Like I said, that's why they hate Pete Hegseth and Tulsi Gabbard and all the other people that are in the cabinet and doing all the things that they're doing. The reason why Trump is divisive on the right and why you have so many people on the right becoming enemies of Trump and why there's this big debate about foreign policy and monetary policy and government spending and the intel agencies and things like that is Trump is issuing a correction. He's issuing a correction to the quote-unquote conservatism, which isn't conservatism at all, that has defined modern Republican politics for years, really. Probably about at least 30 and probably more than that. And I think what's important to understand here is that the Republican politics before Trump and the ones that are kind of being the antibodies that are attacking the internal GOP fighting right now, these aren't actually conservative people at all. They're not. This is the fission and the split that's currently going on in conservative politics. And a lot of people have named Trump as like this flag bearer of the quote unquote new right, this is like the new version of conservatism. But that's inaccurate. That's actually not true. What's happening is that he is reverting conservatism back to its actual definition. He is being more of a true conservative than any conservative politician of my lifetime. And that's including people that have become president who are conservatives. And that's why I think Trump is he's being viewed as a revolutionary figure, as a person who is really kind of making a lot of change inside of the GOP, because he's actually reverting and redefining what a conservative is and what a conservative means to its true definition. So the most accurate way, I think, to describe Trump, in my view, and Trumpism, is a term called paleoconservatism. So people that might be on paleo diets, people might be on, like they've heard Paleolithic, all these sorts of things. So what does that mean? I'm a word person. I'm a writer. It's important for me to get definitions right. So the reason why I think Trump is a paleoconservative, and a lot of people are kind of aligned with this vision, is that paleo means older or ancient. So think, again, Paleolithic, paleo diet. You're eating the things that, our cavemen ancestors used to eat, right? It falls in line with conservatism by definition, because conservatism is to conserve tradition. It is traditional to be a conservative. So paleo lines up with older or ancient, which falls in lines with conservative. And the point of conservatism is to, at least in my view, is to keep the traditional values of a society alive. What got us here? What is the meaning of life? What are all these things that we need to decide? If you are a conservative person and you call yourself a conservative, you are only a conservative if you value the things that got us here, the traditions, the stories, the patriotism, whatever, all of that sort of thing. And currently in America, what conservative politics is not doing is doing that for the most part. This is a very new thing that Trump has reintroduced to everybody. Instead, conservative politics for the longest time, for my entire life up until Trump, has been defined by really two things: neoliberalism and neoconservatism. So neo means new, which goes completely against conservatism, right? That means you're a progressive. So neoliberals and neoconservatives are actually progressives. They're not conservatives. They're not. So neoliberalism, this wild, quote unquote, free market capitalism, which essentially just, feudalism and looting from a lot of other people and, kind of distributing the wealth. It's really no different than communism from that standpoint. And then neoconservatism, which is this imperialistic desire to colonize the world and, quote unquote, spread our values and to spread democracy around the world. This is not conservatism at all. It's not. And the fact that, like I said, it's the same thing as social justice. Justice is justice. You don't need to attach a suffix onto it, or a prefix onto it, rather, or a suffix, but a prefix in this context. So neo, meaning new is not traditional. Traditional is not new. So anyone describing them as, I'm a neo this, or I'm a neo that, they're not a conservative, regardless of how they're claiming to be. This is why all the neocons hate Trump, and why all the neoliberals who hate the tariffs hate Trump. There are two people that hate Trump right now: the people who are quote unquote like free market people, the neoliberals, and the endless wars people, the people who want to completely go all in on Ukraine, go all in on Israel, all these sorts of things. And there's debate and discussion to have around that. But in terms of they want to go and bomb Iran and open up everything in terms of the free markets and not bring any manufacturing back, and the tariffs are awful, all this sorts of things. These people are the quote unquote conservatives that try to say that they're for this. They're not. They're progressives. All of them, by definition. And it's worth noting here that neocons and neolibs have not helped conservatives at all. Instead, like I said, they're closeted leftists. They're closeted leftists and progressives. Dave Smith was just on Tucker Carlson a couple days ago talking about this, where he was talking about Ben Shapiro. Ben Shapiro, I've made the argument before, is a closeted leftist because of these reasons. In a way, and do I think Ben is probably conservative? Yes. I think Ben is he's very socially conservative, for one thing, so that's a good thing. But in terms of all of these things, in terms of the war in Ukraine, the war in Israel, the COVID vax, everything else, he fell for all of it. And it's not just Ben. I just don't want to people are picking on Ben like crazy nowadays, and I think some of that's fair, but also some of it's unfair. But in terms of the people who just believe this stuff broadly, foreign wars and American imperialism, i.e. neoconservatism, across the world have done two things. They've hollowed out our budget, and they've hollowed out our standing in the world. So they have degraded American interests across the world by depleting our military, by butchering, people all across the world with the war on terror, and by terrorizing our young men and young women that have to go fight over there and do all that sort of thing. and they've destabilized our standing across the world. Like the world does not like us in a lot of the world because we are seen as this imperialist state that goes over and topples this government, and the CIA goes in here and blows up this building and all this sort of stuff. And it's been terrible. It's been terrible for America. It's been terrible for the citizenry. It's been terrible for our budget. It's been terrible for our monetary stance. It's been terrible for everything. And on the other side, with the neoliberal stance, our modern quote-unquote free market economic system has completely screwed over the economy for most Americans. It's completely screwed over the economy. We don't have a middle class in this country anymore. We have a feudal system. This is what Steve Bannon calls neo-feudalism, which is true. We have a big bunch of this is the World Economic Forum, the BlackRock people. It's a bunch of people who own stuff at the top. And by the way, I'm not a Marxist while saying this. This is just kind of the reality of the situation. We have all these corporations, these governments buying up property, buying up single-family housing, buying up all of this farmland, everything else, and no one can own anything anymore. Like if you're not overtly wealthy, you don't have a chance, especially if you're a young person. Like young people are going to get crushed by this if we don't fix this immediately and don't raise wages and not distribute, that sounds like a bad word, but make it more accessible to own things. And so the reason why the conservative the conservative policy battle is happening right now is that Trump is anti-war and Trump is pro-American worker. And being anti-war and being pro-American worker are death blows to neoconservatism and neoliberalism. They are the two things they are the kryptonite to both of these things, which is why you see and hear so many people screaming about them on cable news. Oh, you hate Israel, you hate Gaza, you hate Ukraine, you hate Russia, you want to tank some tech sales executive out in Silicon Valley. You want to tank my 401k. It's like, no. I don't want to kill more people. I think the single most impactful thing that Trump said on the campaign, I think he said this in a debate with both Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, is that he's like, I just want the dying to stop. I just want the dying to stop. And I'm like, yes, I want the dying to stop too. Lots of people want the dying to stop. I want to stop the dying. That's why. And then people in this country have gotten screwed by our modern system of neoliberal economics. They've gotten screwed by it. And this is not anti-free market, by the way. I love capitalism. I love the free market. But it needs to work and be accessible to everybody. That's the point of the free market. If everyone cannot have a chance, and people can fail and do all these things, and that's fine, and they should if they don't do well, but if people do not even have a chance to get out to the starting line, that is not a free market. That's anti-competitive. And that's exactly what Trump is saying. That's why he's doing the tariffs and why he's slamming this on other people. That's exactly why. So it's why you hear so much screeching from them about stuff that doesn't matter. Also, about like social causes and climate change. And like it's all a psyop. It's all a psyop because they know that all of this is BS. They know that all of this is complete garbage. They know that they didn't sign up for this. And they know that Trump is going for the jugular like he did with USAID, like he did with the wars, like he did with everything else in terms of toppling this on the right. And that's why a good amount of quote-unquote conservatives, who are not conservatives at all, are people on the right, quote-unquote. They're not actually. They're fake. They're fraudulent. And I'm so glad they're being exposed now for all to see. And there is no bigger example of this. This is actually funny. I was actually here when this happened. There is no bigger example of the divide in the American right now than Dan Crenshaw. So Dan Crenshaw got in a little bit of a spat a couple of months ago with Tucker Carlson. So Dan Crenshaw was over in Great Britain. I was actually at this event with Dan Crenshaw. We were at ARC together, the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship conference that Jordan Peterson put on. And Crenshaw and Peterson are friends. And Crenshaw is on the advisory board, I believe, for ARC. And so Crenshaw got over late, and I don't like Dan Crenshaw at all, and I kind of loathe Dan Crenshaw, to be honest. He lives in my state, which I can't stand because he's so anti-Texas. But anyway, he was there, and he was giving this interview with GB News. And I think I might have actually seen this happen. I didn't hear anything or whatever. And for those who don't remember, he said Tucker Carlson had been calling him out for a very, very long time in terms of like, Crenshaw's a neocon. He doesn't care about his voters, which is true. Both those things are true. And, so Crenshaw finishes up his interview with GB News, and he takes off his mic, but he doesn't turn his mic off. And he says that he would literally kill Tucker Carlson. He said, if he were here right now, I'd kill him. I'd shoot him. And that's a wild thing to say. Like, that's a politician threatening a journalist. Like, that used to be like a strict no-go zone. So, like, again, and I think this is so interesting because as soon back as 2020, 5 years ago, Dan Crenshaw was viewed by me and by a lot of other people as the future of American conservatism. Brett Weinstein, when he was doing his Unity 2020 initiative, he wanted to put up a ticket with Dan Crenshaw and Tulsi Gabbard for president and vice president. And I would have backed it because I thought Dan Crenshaw was like, oh, he's got the eye patch and he's this and he's MAGA and whatever. But in that 5 years, Dan Crenshaw has been exposed as just kind of a joke, actually. Like, he's a clown. And he was on Rogan several times. He got endorsements from Donald Trump and multiple other people. Like why has this happened? I think this is a very, very telling example of why the fall of Dan Crenshaw has this happen. I call this like the Karening of Dan Crenshaw, how Dan Crenshaw turned into a Karen. So you must go back to the beginning when it comes to Dan Crenshaw. So for those who don't know, I've actually kind of followed, like, Dan Crenshaw was honestly like the first big politician after Trump that I really knew because of this. So Dan Crenshaw got famous, if you don't remember, by getting lampooned by Pete Davidson on Saturday Night Live. I think this was just after he got elected to Congress. And Pete Davidson made, and, you know, think what you want about Pete Davidson. I my opinions on Pete Davidson, but, you know, Pete threw out this joke that was really kind of harmless, honestly. Like, it wasn't bad at all. I think he said something like, you know, Dan Crenshaw looks something like a pirate in a porn film because of his eye patch. And people went bananas when Pete Davidson said this. How dare you mock Dan Crenshaw? This is kind of the, I talk about this in my new book that's coming out. This is like the transableism thing coming out. Like, how dare you make fun of someone with a disability? How dare you make fun of someone who can't see or whatever, which Dan Crenshaw can see out of his one eye, even though it's impaired because he got blown up in the War on Terror. And shout out to Dan Crenshaw for his service on that. But the right essentially came way hard against Pete Davidson and shamed him for this. And I was like, whoa. And so what Dan Crenshaw did was he saw this as an opportunity to get more exposure. And so this essentially turned Dan Crenshaw into a pet for the right and kind of like a mascot for what the quote-unquote new right was looking at, even though Dan Crenshaw is really no different than John McCain or John Cornyn or all these, these warmonger, plant the U.S. across the world, like, trade stocks all you want. Like, he's no different than Nancy Pelosi in that way, honestly. But anyway, so Dan Crenshaw goes on SNL with Pete Davidson, and he does this whole thing, and I don't think he hosted the show, but he went on with Pete Davidson and, like, talked about stuff, and people were like, oh my God, Dan Crenshaw's so cool. He's on Saturday Night Live, whatever. He wrote a best-selling book about it, and everyone just kind of forgot what Dan Crenshaw actually stood for, which was endless wars, neoliberal economics, and, like, protection of the intel agencies. That's really what Dan Crenshaw stands for at the end of the day. And the irony about all of this is Dan Crenshaw is only relevant. He only was able to ascend to this level of political relevance for the thing that he supposedly stood against. This is what his book was about. I read his book, Victimhood. Dan Crenshaw was made famous because Pete Davidson made fun of his eye patch and his war wounds. That is the only reason that Dan Crenshaw is a thing. And could he have been a thing for other things? Sure. But that was the main escalation for the fame of Dan Crenshaw. And so Crenshaw used this to kind of resurface his reputation. I'm not for the wars. I love Trump. I'm not for the intel agencies. I trade in stocks in Congress. Like, I'm not for that, all these things, and void any criticism against him. And I want to make this abundantly clear. We should thank Dan Crenshaw for his service. Any person that serves our country, we should thank them for that. But we need to be honest also about what he actually thinks and believes. It doesn't matter that Dan Crenshaw got wounded in the Middle East when it comes to his policies. If his policies are harmful, if his policies do not further the agenda of what his voters want. By the way, Dan Crenshaw is in a district outside of Houston, most likely a blood red district outside of Houston. And Dan Crenshaw is basically like a leftist, which is just, it's bananas. It's just crazy when you look at Dan Crenshaw and how he is. And so in reality, and this is why Crenshaw got so mad at Tucker Carlson, Dan Crenshaw is exactly who Tucker said he is. He's exactly who he said he is. He's a warmonger. He's an intel community shill. He's a large corporate lobbyist who's gotten rich from insider trading. If you look at the guy who runs Nancy Pelosi's Stock Trader, which is a hilarious account on X, if you look up that, like, Dan Crenshaw is like, I think in the top 5 of people whose investment portfolios have gotten huge over his time in Congress. Why is that? Maybe because he knows something and he knows people and he kind of gets inside. Like, it's just, it's absurd. It's ridiculous. And the same thing is true with like Richard Burr and Kelly Loeffler, Kelly Loeffler's in the Trump administration right now, and I don't like that woman at all. And so he is essentially, he's the swampiest of all the swamp creatures. And I think the most, this was shown in, I think he was doing an interview with the Free Press, which is again a propaganda outlet run by Barry Weiss. But she was doing a panel, I think, with Batya Ungar-Sargon, who I really, really love. I love Batya. And so Batya asked him this question, or I don't know if it was Batya, but it was a panel, but she was on it, about stock trading in Congress. And Crenshaw doesn't give an answer. He kind of just snaps at Batya Ungar-Sargon. Like, look this up. It's hilarious, actually. He's like, why are we even talking about this? I'm more important than stock trading. I don't do, why aren't we talking? This is so unimportant. It's like, no, dude, it's actually very important. A lot of people care about this. I care about this. Your voters care about this. And this, again, this kind of just leftist, elitist, nonsensical drivel, just pathetic excuse for all these things. It just shows that Dan Crenshaw doesn't care about his citizens at all. He doesn't care about his voters. He doesn't care about the MAGA movement. He doesn't care about, he only cares about himself. He only cares about himself. And it's just very apparent with someone like Dan Crenshaw, who, again, is like just a Karen at this point. And he just doesn't believe what people say or think that he believes and what he says that he believes. He just doesn't. His voting record shows that. His stock trader record shows that. And I think we just all need to be more aware of people that are just lying about that sort of thing, because it doesn't do us any good to have people who are not telling us the truth in our politics. And so I think this is an interesting segue. This has kind of led to like the anti-woke conservative crowd. I want to talk about them next, the quote-unquote anti-woke people. This has mostly become a shell game inside of conservative politics. It's been mostly a shell game. So due to the, and I think to explain this and to lead into this, conservative policies and causes have been very, very unpopular for the last 25 years. That's why, or the last 30 years. That's why we've been trounced in every single election, really, since, and George Bush won by the skin of his teeth. George Bush the Younger won by the skin of his teeth over Al Gore, all these things. But if you look at all of the policies that quote-unquote conservatives, which again aren't conservatives at all, they stood for over time, it's like the endless war agenda, the neoliberal economics, all these, this endless free market nonsense, all this sort of thing, the erosion of the working class, the middle class. It's a very unpopular agenda. It's a very unpopular agenda. And this is why there has been nothing going for conservatives for decades. They've just campaigned on tax cuts and, all these other, they've just been lame. They haven't been cool in a very, very long time. And so the biggest thing that the right needed for a long time was relevance. They needed something cultural to get them out of that malaise that they've been in, instead of saying we need to go bomb Yemen or something, which we did bomb. Well, Obama bombed Yemen, but everyone bombs everybody these days, apparently, in our government. But that's beside the point. So the two things that did this, and the conservatives have gotten out of this, and this has been a good thing in some ways. The two things that have given them that cultural relevance were Donald Trump and woke culture, which jolted life into conservatives for the first time in decades. And so when Donald Trump came along, and when the left started going bananas in terms of all of their social issues and all these things about I can have 75 genders and I can, I can cut the body parts off my child. It's just whoa, that's kind of a wild thing to say. And so really, what conservatives did, this is the error that they've made, and this is why a lot of these grifters who are not conservatives but have been kind of attached to conservative causes, this is why they've been made relevant, because the reason why conservative thought has been made mainstream have been discussed and really gave Donald Trump both of his victories in large part is not due to anything that they themselves have done. That's an important thing. The Republican Party is incompetent and has been for a very, very long time. It's starting to get some legs now, and hopefully that will continue. I wouldn't bet on it, but hopefully it's going to continue. But for the longest time, they were just a party of, Vivek Ramaswamy called this out when he was talking about how they needed to fire Ron McDaniel. He's like, conservatives are losers. You guys have lost so much over the time. You have allowed this insanity, this leftist craziness to overtake the country. And so instead, what they have done is not made themselves better. They've instead just been reactionary to the excesses of the left. They have not been proactive, they've been reactive. And this is why conservatives, quote unquote, love wokeness. They love it. They need it. Because it's the only thing outside of Trump, who they despise, that has made them relevant. Without wokeness, without woke culture, without Donald Trump, they got nothing. They're just like the Democrats are now. They're nothing. They got nothing. And it's also why you see a lot of resistance to the Trump agenda from the right, from the GOP. Trump is so anti-woke. He already signed the anti-DEI stuff. He already signed the whatever. And there's some things obviously that contradict that. But he's mostly been like every one of his iconic lines: "Everything woke turns to shit." And so like that's been kind of his claim to fame. But they're uncomfortable with him pushing against it. The fraudulent conservatives out there, they are uncomfortable with Donald Trump pushing against it, because if Trump quashes DEI, if he quashes all of these climate change stuff, he quashes this gender stuff, then they're actually going to have a conversation on policy. And for the longest time, conservative policy has been wildly unpopular with everybody. Everybody. So the GOP does not know where they derive their power from, and they don't want it to go away. They want the friction. They want the resistance. They want the leftism. That's why they're in bed with all the leftists. It's why it's a uniparty. Because they know without woke culture, they will shrivel and die. They will shrivel and die without it. And I just think that it's unbelievable that we've gotten to a point that conservative politicians have been so lampooned and so made fun of and so emasculated by so many different things that they just don't have an agenda. They don't have anything. And the only thing, there's a reason why a lot of people think when Donald Trump gets out of office, they're going to completely fall off the wagon again. And they very well could. Because knowing them, they're going to go back to their same unpopular things. They're going to push the wars again. They're going to push we can get greater efficiency. We can raise our GDP by like 1/10 of a percentage point or something if we, gut the middle class even more, like whatever. But I want to bring this up because this is important for the voters and the citizens to know who are on the right or who consider themselves conservatives or fans of Trump or whatever. Because without knowing this, we're going to fall for the same trap over and over and over again. We're going to fall for it over and over again. And this is why I am planting my flag in this. We cannot get away from Trump. Trump is the future of conservatism. He is. And if you call yourself conservative and you don't align with Donald Trump, I would question whether you're conservative or not. Because like I said earlier, to get away from Trump and his agenda would be to fall into a compromised and controlled opposition version of quote unquote conservatism, which is not really conservatism at all in any sense of the word, like I mentioned earlier. You're not a conservative if you follow neoconservative foreign policy, for example. You're not a conservative if you're a fan of neoliberal economics, for example. It's a leftist position. It is. And it's an imperialistic position. That's not a conservative position. It's not what the founders wanted. It's not. Read the Constitution. Read the Declaration of Independence. Read the Federalist Papers. Don't spread yourself too thin around the world. That's not a country. That is an empire, both on the economic side and the war side. So this clinging to wokeness needs to die. And I'm glad that it's dying, at least in part. But we cannot die with the woke stuff. We can't do it. So the only thing we need to do is lean into the picture and the future and the vision that Trump has created. And the other side, and the other people who are quote unquote conservatives, we need to leave them in the dust. They've missed the boat. Might as well just kick them over the other side at this point. They're no good for anything else. So then this begs the question then, what is a real conservative, quote unquote real conservative? I've had this debate with a lot of people over time, and I think it's a good question. So this is a very important thing. If you call yourself a conservative, there needs to be things that you stand for. If you call yourself a liberal, there needs to be things you need to stand for. And I think there's kind of just this hodgepodge of various, just questions about it. And I think that I came up with a couple. I came up with three three major things and major themes that define conservatism. And it all comes from, again, the ultimate question of this, which is something that Matt Walsh asks a lot. So the question that Matt Walsh asks a ton, which is the right question to ask in my view, is what are you conserving? What are you conserving? You cannot call yourself a conservative if you do not conserve anything. This is the one flaw, like I said earlier, with MAGA, which will be its downfall if they don't fix this, is that they don't have a clear vision for the future outside of Donald Trump. Donald Trump's only going to be here for another 3 years. He's only going to be here for another 3 years, which is going to cause it to fall apart like the Tea Party did, like all this other kind of stuff. It doesn't. We don't have a vision. Proverbs says this. It's biblical. Without a vision, people perish. So this is why, this is an encouraging sign, this is why all the people like Vance, Ramaswamy, Hegseth, Gabbard, Kash Patel, all of the younger members of the cabinet are so important, is because it's showing them that they have a future and that future is more MAGA than quote-unquote conservatism of old, which is not conservative in Republican politics at all. And I wanted to kind of string together a couple of things that I think are really important to conservatives today, and I think what conservatism needs to be defined on. And I think they can win on all three of these issues. The first one is an emphasis on the family and an emphasis on values. And values, particularly around the flourishing of the American family, which has been totally gutted over the last decades. It's just like the amount of barriers in the way. I'm reading a great book on this by Tim Carney right now. Shout out to Tim Carney. And I read a great book on marriage read a great book by Brad Wilcox on marriage. Shout out to Brad Wilcox. The amount of opposition towards marriage and family by the government and by our culture is outrageous. It's outrageous. So values around the flourishing of the family and becoming the party of the family, the party that says get married, stay married, have kids, raise kids, be a part of a community with children inside of it. That is going to be absolutely critical. And I think J.D. Vance has been a home run on this. He's been an absolute home run on this. And as have Vivek Ramaswamy and as have Bobby Kennedy, in my view, even though Bobby Kennedy's been divorced 3 times, but he has 7 kids and all the sorts of things. He comes from a family structure and has advocated for the family. If family, and when you ask people this generally, and I think this is true regardless of your politics, but family is the most important thing, particularly for religious people, for Christians, for Muslims, for Jews, for Hindus, to many Americans. It's important for a lot of people, but particularly to religious people. And by the way, the right has an advantage with religious people. We have an advantage with now majority Muslims, or not majority Muslims, but we're increasing our share of Muslims, Catholics, Christians, Jews, maybe not a lot of Jews, but some Jews, like some Muslims, are coming over to our side and running outside margin compared to what they usually do inside of this election. And this is very, very critical. We must inspire young people to get married, to have families, and to have children within those families. This is where Elon Musk is wrong on this. Owen Strand had a great video about this a couple days ago, the great Owen Strand, where he said, the point is more children, yes, but children within the family. That details matter, as Jack Reacher says. We need to have marriages that lead to families and children with those families. If we align conservatism to supporting the family, which is an inherently conservative institution, Vivek Ramaswamy gets this right. He says the nuclear family is the most important and foundational form of governments in the history of mankind. He's absolutely right about that. Absolutely right about that. That is a home run issue about emphasizing and becoming the party of the family, particularly for young people. Young people want families, but we just don't think that we can have families. I do, but a lot of people don't. And so that needs to be emphasized. The second one is something that Trump has been a home run on this, an emphasis on opportunity and excellence through that opportunity. So Trump promised to unify America through exceptionalism, through winning, as he likes to say. This is a great idea. This is a great idea, and it hits home with everybody. I don't care how much of an advocate, quote unquote, you are for marginalized people or whatever. I don't care about that. This one hits home with everybody. Everybody, conservatives, liberals, independents, whatever. Achievement and hard work are universal things, even if the people on the left sometimes don't want to admit it. This is where Elon Musk and the anti-woke DEI stuff is very, very important. We need people to strive, to build, and to be encouraged to take risks and to be great at things. We need to honor our heroes. We need to honor people who are great, to inspire greatness in others. To maybe atone for my anti-Ben Shapiro stance earlier on. Ben Shapiro nailed this earlier this year when Elon Musk's Mechazilla caught the rocket when it was coming back from space for the first time. And people, including me, were like, that is the most wild thing I've ever seen in my entire life. And then the people on the left lampooned it. And they said, like, oh, like, they're just, it's just a rocket coming back from space. What's the big deal? I'm like, that's a big deal. Like, can we admit that's a big deal, right? And so we need to become the people that are honoring of greatness. This is why I think, Trump doing this thing with Nick Saban in college football is important. Nick Saban is the greatest college football coach ever. And the fact that he's working with Donald Trump to make college football into a better system, that's a great sign. Sports are amazing vehicles for excellence. Amazing vehicles for excellence. I love John Jones when he defended the heavyweight title and he handed the belt to Donald Trump. That was a great moment. It was a great moment in Madison Square Garden, the most famous arena in the history of the world. Inspiring greatness in people. That's very important. And the third thing is, I believe the most inspirational line of the campaign didn't come from Donald Trump, it came from Bobby Kennedy, when he said that we need to love something greater more than hating each other. And I thought, nailed it, bar, absolute bar. And it's important to call this out and to be honest with this. Right now, the American left is defined by hatred. The American left is defined by hatred now of Donald Trump, of America, of its people. They called us garbage. They called us deplorables. They hate the country. You don't love something and want to change everything about it. They hate America. They hate half of the country. They hate Donald Trump. They hate what he stands for. They hate all the things that he advocates for. It's clear as day. Just turn on the cable news. So, if conservatives are to become Arthur Brooks makes this point, become the party of love rather than hate, love always wins over hate. It always does. If we are able to define and protect causes that they love, patriotism, families, communities, etc., they will dominate the future and win people over, particularly young people, by the way, working class people, minorities, for decades to come. Absolute decades to come. We are seeing seeds of this planet now, which is awesome, and we need to press the pedal down. We need to keep it up. If we do this, if we could become the part, this is going to sound so cheesy, if we become the party of love, the cause of love, we're going to win. It's not even a question. We will win. Because hatred is so divisive. It's so awful for so many reasons that if we just love people and we love causes that we think are admirable, we'll win. We will 100% win. So the party of the family, the party of excellence, and the party of loving things over hating things. I think if the GOP does that, then we'll run roughshod over everybody. At least that's the hope. Thank you for watching, everyone. Own the day. Open your mind. I'll see you next week.